Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. One of the great joys of living in Sag Harbor and nearby is the vibrancy of our cultural community. And we always knew as we were raising the money to, rebuild the cinema, that collaborating with other local arts institution would be one of the big things that we were going to be doing and looking forward to. This is one example of those two arts organizations joining together. And in order to introduce the afternoon, I'm going to call here Diana Howard, the co-president of the Steinbeck House, and Bret Anthony Johnston, who is the director of the Michener Center for Writers at the University of Texas in Austin.
First, want to say thanks to Giulia for collaborating with us on this event. It's been really fun to work with you, and I can't imagine any other venue that would have been better than this one for this event. So thank you very much. Since we opened in Memorial Day weekend of 2023, Steinbeck House with its volunteer docents have led more than 1,300 people through the property. We have annual high school writing workshops, and we just found out 2 weeks ago that we've been nominated to the State Register of Historic Places and the National Register of Historic Places. It's been a true community effort to preserve Steinbeck House. It all began with Catherine Zoika, who is right here, was reading the paper, saw that the property was for sale, and rallied the troops so that we could purchase it. The Sag Harbor Partnership worked tirelessly to raise the money to purchase the property. Tommy John Scavone, our assemblyman, was critical to the success of purchasing the property. And many, many thanks to the town of Southampton, the state of New York for their financial contributions, and to our individual donors. When we're thinking about preserving Steinbeck House, our dream was for it to be used as a writer's retreat. After partnering with the Michener Center of Writers in Austin, that dream became a reality. It's through the work of Bret Anthony Johnston, the director of the Michener Center, and Hawley Doyle, the assistant director of the Michener Center, that we've had such fabulous, fabulous writers in residence. And the fact that we get to spend this evening with Noah Hawley and watch an episode of FARGO is just a testament to the excellence that the Michener Center brings to our endeavor. So thank you very much. If you haven't toured the property yet, it's beautiful. You can reserve a tour. They're free online, steinbeckhouseny.org. You can also donate there if you're interested in donating. The money that we collect goes to having community outreach events, and we're trying to restore the pool that John and Elaine Steinbeck built on the property in 1958 and make it into a shallow water feature. A fun way to donate is that we're selling inscribed bricks for $1,000. You can have your name put on it. You can have a message put on it. And you too can be a permanent part of the legacy of Steinbeck House. If you're interested in doing any of those, we have handouts outside the cinema. And then there's some upstairs too. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to Bret.
Thank you, Diana. As Diana mentioned, Hawley Doyle and I came in for this event, and I think the first thing that we have to do is apologize for the miserable weather that we brought from Texas. Genevieve assured us that it's welcome based on the long winter that you've had, but she's the only one. Everybody else is mad at us. And I want to thank certainly Giulia and everybody at the Sag Harbor Cinema for hosting us tonight for this amazing event. Everybody on the Sag Harbor Partnership, the Steinbeck House board, all of the docents, Mitch, our property manager. But mostly I want to be the one to thank Diana Howard, who is one of the beating hearts of the Steinbeck House and who is in many ways the bridge between Sag Harbor and Austin, Texas. And I think it's fair to say that without her, this probably wouldn't have happened. And without her, none of us would have wanted it to happen. So can you please help me thank Diana for everything she does? In case you have not heard me speak before, I think this is the part of the program where I am contractually obligated to tell you that when John Steinbeck won the Pulitzer Prize for The Grapes of Wrath, he signed over his check for $1,000 to a writer in hopes of helping that writer finish his first novel. When the money ran out and the writer had not finished his first novel, which is a problem that still persists for writers, John Steinbeck went above and beyond, and he offered that writer the use of his house so that he could have a place to stay and focus on his work. It is that legacy of generosity that brought the Michener Center for Writers to the table. That is the legacy of generosity that we are trying to uphold with the Steinbeck Writing Retreat. We've had 2 Pulitzer Prize winning writers stay in the house over the last 2 summers. We've had 2 writers come in the fall and work on their first books. And I'm very proud to say that the first writer who was here to work on her book, Carrie Moore, that book will be released in a couple of weeks in July. And we're all incredibly excited about it, and it would not be an overstatement to say that that would not have happened without the support of the Steinbeck Writing Retreat and thus the Sag Harbor community. The 5th writer that we're welcoming to the Steinbeck Writers Retreat is Noah Hawley. Noah is one of the most accomplished auteurs and versatile storytellers working in television, film, and literature today. He's the author of 6 novels, powerful and moving bestsellers, and he balances the art of telling cinematic, unforgettable, character-driven stories that linger long after you've been immersed in them. Over the course of his more than 20-year career, Hawley's work as a novelist, screenwriter, series creator, showrunner, and director has garnered critical acclaim all over, winning Emmy, Writers Guild, PEN, Critics' Choice, and Peabody Awards, as well as the passionate responses from audiences around the world. Hawley is most well known perhaps for his extraordinary anthology series on FX, FARGO, which we'll see some of and discuss tonight. But this summer, he'll release Alien Earth, the hugely anticipated FX television series based on the iconic film franchise. For all of his success on the page and screen, perhaps what I admire most about Noah is his deep commitment to creating community wherever he goes. He has as much a gift for bringing interesting people together as he does for bringing them to life in his scripts and in his novels. To wit, Noah, Kyle, and 26 Keys Productions, they've gone above and beyond, and they're hosting a private reception for all of you tonight after the event. So please stick around and say hello. And please now help me welcome and thank Noah Hawley for joining the Sag Harbor community as the 2025 Steinbeck Writers Retreat Writer in Residence.
Thank you so much. I'm not going to speak for a long time. I'm just going to say I'm thrilled to be here. I can't tell you how inspiring it is to work in the house that John Steinbeck bought with the money he made from being a genius. It's been really meaningful to me to have this opportunity in this moment before I do this global launch of Alien Earth, and between getting these kids through school and trying to find a moment to really have a creative thought and enjoy the time that we have together. So I chose this hour of Fargo, which is season 2 of Fargo, because it was not an easy hour to construct. The first season had been so successful, and the network was very nervous. The second season had a very different sense of scale to it, and I'll talk afterwards, I think, about what makes something a Fargo story, but they were not convinced, and we had some challenges in the production of it, and and it really forced me as a filmmaker, an editor, and a producer to step up, and that's why I chose it, because I think those are really interesting lessons to talk about. So let's watch, and we'll talk after. Thank you.
Stay for the Q&A and then join us upstairs. And here is Noah Hawley, and Bret Anthony Johnston will join us. Thank you, Noah.
Thank you.
So I would like to go back to what you were saying at the beginning about this episode and,
Yes.
and the reason why you picked it and the challenges that it presented.
Yeah, well, as I said, the first season, which was a somewhat literal one-to-one translation of the movie, where the car salesman was an insurance salesman, and had a scale that was similar to the movie. But when I went in to pitch FX the show the first time, I said, "Why is the movie called Fargo? It's set in Minnesota, right? Except that Fargo is a word that's evocative of a place." Right, what Joel and Ethan Coen called Siberia with family restaurants, and I said after the movie, it's also evocative of a type of story, right? A true crime story that isn't true, where truth is stranger than fiction, and so really what it is a state of mind, right? And so I thought that Fargo could easily be the one-to-one translation, but could it also be a 1979 crime epic about the death of the family business and the rise of corporate America, right? And with all these moving pieces. And the network was nervous because we'd won all the awards, and to their credit, they didn't say, couldn't we do another season with Allison Tolman and Billy Bob? But they were worried that it didn't work, and they gave me a lot of notes all through the writing process. And I didn't direct this hour. We brought in a director who had worked with us on season 1. And the thing about a Coen Brothers movie is that they write a lot of movies that they don't direct, and those never feel like Coen Brothers movies. So there has to be something in the cinematic translation of the scripts that makes something a Coen Brothers movie. And I had to figure out what that was and employ the cinematic rules, the way the camera moves, tone of voice, etc. And the director who came in, I mean, as I said, he directed for us on the first season, but I think because this was a new story, he thought, oh, I'm making a television pilot, and he came in with his own ideas, and some of those are encouraged, and some of it just was at odds with what Fargo needs to be tonally and cinematically. And so it was a complex process of working it with him, and at the end of it, I had an episode that didn't work. And I had to bring the episode to the network that didn't work and say, I know it doesn't work, but I need more money because I know it will work, if I can get in there and make it work. And we can talk about the ways but there was a process of editing, that was really helpful in having footage that didn't work. The split screens came out of that process, right? And the mystery of who hit him with the car came out of it, because in the script, she hits him, she gets out of the car, we know the whole time that it's her. But in trying to make the footage that I had work, those were the sort of innovations that I came up with. And so, then there, and in the end, we ended up introducing, the Gerhardts. That first scene was in there, and then I think the final scene with the Kansas City Mafia. These things got added as we went through, but I thought it would be more interesting to talk about that than to show the first hour of season 5 and go, yeah, that's what I wanted, that's what I wanted, that's what I wanted. So,
is there talking about the change from we see her, we know that she did it, and we move through the rest of the episode that way, the way that you had written it, and then seeing what he did and then what you ultimately had to redo, is that unusual for you as a writer, regardless of genre, or is that kind of par for the course?
It's become more and more usual, I find. I think that was the first time I really had to challenge myself in the editing room. Those moments where you're like, well, this footage will never do what I wanted it to do, so what else could it do? That could be maybe better, and one of the things that's really interesting, I find, is that audiences forget. Really dramatic things happen. A woman, a car hits a guy, he goes in the windshield, the car drives away, and then we have the aftermath of it, and you meet Patrick Wilson and his wife, and okay, then with the butcher shop, and then you go home, and then you've forgotten that there's this loose end, a lot of the audience, and so when they hear that sound from the garage, I think they remember. And that's a really interesting moment for me of playing with the audience's expectations and their memories.
So is it just building on that, do you see what is your relationship to this episode as opposed to the episode that begins season 5, where everything is exactly as you planned it, but this has this incredible reward at the end of the episode that you had no idea about?
Yeah, I mean, it's what it teaches me is that I can fix problems, right? Which, the television showrunner is such a strange job, because you're both the chief creative. I run the writer's room, I write and rewrite all the scripts, and then, now I direct at least a couple of hours, but then I have to train the other directors how to make the show, and then I also have to manage the budget, I have to manage the production, I have to manage the corporations. It's like 6 jobs in one, and a film director doesn't have that job, and a film writer or a TV writer doesn't have, so it's a very unique kind of job, and the better you are at fixing problems, the less you worry that problems will arrive. My wife Kyle talks a lot about wabi sabi, and like you work with what you got, and when I made a show in Austin called My Generation, and the motto was "Imperfect is perfect," and I think there's something organic to having a little bit of rough edges on things that you can get too obsessive about perfection.
I think it would be interesting to, since you as you said, you're responsible for the unity, the uniform. I think that to the other creative contribution that as a showrunner, and you in particular, bring to a series like Fargo, because they're obviously stylistic. There are stylistic choices, there are tone choice. I mean, it's multiple. I don't think it's just the writing.
Yeah, I mean, what happened? I decided early on that I don't want you to ever cinematically confuse one season for another. And the first season was all snow, 40 degrees below zero at the coldest. This season didn't really snow that much browner. We embraced cinematically that look. So setting that look every year is really important to me. I also decided in this season that I wanted to score it mainly with songs from Coen Brothers movies that we had covers done of. So I had, a bunch of bands, Shaky Graves and other groups come in and do it. I recorded this cover of the song from "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou." There's a handmade quality of it for me, of like, I see it in my head, I hear the way I want it to be, and whatever it takes to get to that result. Because ultimately, take all the words out of it, take all the ideas out of it, cinema is a feeling, right? It's a series of feelings that you have, and there's something about that moment where Kristen Milioti gives Patrick Wilson the ashtray, and they have a little laugh about it, and then he tears up. That's not in the script, right? And that surprised me on the day. You don't expect it. And I learned from that, you got to leave room for the actors. And the network said to me, I wrote that scene to introduce Jesse Plemons. And, he comes out, okay then, free meat, okay then. And the network said, I feel like we're missing an opportunity to learn who this guy really is. And I was like, I think this tells you exactly who this guy is, right? It's not information, but it tells you everything you need to know.
And what is it, despite the different era, the different plot, what is it that makes a Fargo story in your mind?
I mean, most of it is tone in a way. I mean, I think of these stories as the stories of decency versus evil. It's not good versus evil. It's basically decent people who are probably in over their heads, and when those people, when a Patrick Wilson, or Ted Danson goes up against some really bad people, you worry about them, and I think it's also, it's a combination between the humor and the violence and the crime of it, in which the violence and the crime is really difficult, right? But the humor still works. And some of it for me is, and I think it's just an instinct that I have in common with Joel and Ethan is, they do a lot of things in their movies that they think are hysterical, but aren't comedy on the screen, like Anton Chigurh's haircut, right? Like, they laughed at his face for 30 minutes after they cut his hair that way, but there's nothing comedic about it in the movie. It's just unsettling, right? And so I think there's some of that where it's like the unsettling nature of it, where you're not sure if it's supposed to be funny or not, that really makes it.
Can you talk a little bit about the beginning? I mean, the Ronald Reagan, the Carter. It's a brilliant piece of writing and juxtapositions to frame the era.
Yeah. Well, so 1979, was the end of we'd had Vietnam, we'd had Watergate, and Nixon, and 1980 was right around the corner, and Ronald Reagan and Morning in America was right around the corner, but we didn't know it, right? Like. So everyone was at, this is the lowest moment. And so this idea that we were all waiting on Reagan, right? Just like the guy at the beginning was, we're waiting, they're putting the arrows in, in Reagan. It's this sense of any minute now, things are going to change and we don't know. And then, having that instinct, which was in an editorial instinct to put the Jimmy Carter great malaise speech on there, and that piece of music, that Fleetwood Mac song that I just heard on the radio one day driving around, and told him to try working with that, and then the footage going in, then intercutting with the characters in motion and the split screens. You went from really feeling the period of Massacre at Sioux Falls to really feeling the period of 79 before you started.
And the war clearly looms very much on as you were saying before, on the evil part of the episode.
Yeah, I mean, you see if you watch the whole season. I mean, Ted Danson is of the World War II generation, and Patrick Wilson, fought in Vietnam, and I really tried to explore this idea of moral injury that in times of war, people are asked to do things that would be considered immoral in peacetime, right? And if the war is justifiable, like World War II, you can sleep at night. But if you're coming back from Vietnam and you don't even know what the war was for, you feel like you did something wrong because you can't justify the actions of it. And so a lot of the season is rooted in this idea that Patrick Wilson thinks he brought the war home with him, because America has become, this new kind of crime, the viciousness of it. It feels like war to him. So we really play around with that a lot.
And the actors, every season, were you ever tempted to
bring them back and do the Wes Anderson of putting them in different roles? No,
something along those lines.
I never was tempted to do that, nor to bring. I mean, we had Billy, obviously, who'd done a bunch of movies with the Coens, and Michael Stuhlbarg was in season 3, who starred in A Serious Man. So I don't mind poaching a little from Joel and Ethan directly, but it is one of the great honors of doing this, that I can assemble such great casts each time. I mean, I was just watching this one going, oh, and now it's Ted Danson, and now it's Patrick Wilson, and oh, right, there's Nick Offerman, and it's really exciting to work with actors of that caliber, for sure.
How important is it for you that this is an ensemble piece, because you really pay very, very much attention in the writing to give time to each characters to establish them and to balance it?
Yeah, I am, for better or worse, an ensemble storyteller, and I think it serves in the 10-hour story medium because, I believe that stories are richer when you look at them from different points of view. Um, I think also in a story that's 10 hours with a lot of violence, somebody's going to die, and so you need to populate the world. I mean, season 4, there were all 25, 23 main characters or something. But I just don't think there's a small character really, and so I pay just as much attention to the day players and to the any featured characters. Like, you'll see in the next hour we introduce Bokeem Woodbine's character and the Kitchen Brothers, who are his helpers, and they don't talk the whole time, but finding them was really critical because they hold a lot of space on screen, but so they need to carry that. It's a feeling that the right actors in the right roles, and the feeling that you get from Patrick Wilson and Ted Danson in that diner, and the relationship with Krista Milioti, and you're like, I want to be with these people. I think we have this axiom that conflict equals drama. And I think that's true, but I also think that doesn't mean you should have conflict in every relationship. I think especially in a story that's violent, you want to give an audience someplace they feel safe. And then, of course, if you jeopardize that, then they really worry. So,
to broaden it a little bit, you've written 6 novels, you've done film, you've done television, you have Alien Earth coming out. How do you determine which medium is going to serve which story?
I mean, it's a luxury really to have. I find that I tend to be somewhat of a zeitgeist writer, and I don't aim for that. I just, whatever is on my mind, But if you think about, in television, you're basically interacting with the culture in real time. It takes about a year. You write it and you shoot it and it comes out. It's like 1 to 2 year process. Film takes longer, right? That can be 3 or 5 years. And a novel, of course, you live with. You don't know how long. So, a book has to be something where I feel like there's enough there to live with for years, idea-wise and thematically and character-wise. Movies are, I've made the one film, I've written more. It's a kind of fascinating object, the 2-hour film for me. And I always like to experiment with the medium and push the medium as well. So, it just depends really on if I think it's how long the story is and how much is in there.
Maybe we should also open it to the audience. We're monopolizing. Yeah, raise your hand if you have a question.
Raise your hand if you don't have a question.
No,
yeah,
there
okay,
is someone.
When I first saw this episode, when the UFO kind of appeared, I was like, okay, where is this going to be going? Because it wasn't in any of the other stuff, and then what brought you to bring in like the extraterrestrial or the supernatural to Fargo?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because when I told them before, but when the MGM executives came to take me to lunch when we were in the writers' room, they said, "What can you tell me about season 2?" And I said, "Well, we're going to make 3 fake Ronald Reagan movies, and there's a UFO." And they said, "No, really, what can you tell us about season 2?" I mean, part of it for me was, again, 1979. The conspiracy went all the way to the top, right? There was this sense we'd had Kennedy assassinated, both of the Kennedys, and there was a watch the skies feeling. I did find an article about a trooper from that region who had a weird UFO encounter, and then I also, I go back to the Coens and go, is what's in there, because they tend to have a little magic realism. In The Man Who Wasn't There, there's a UFO moment. So I thought, okay, well, that's in there. And then, of course, it all builds up. I won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but it's paid off in the course of the story. And, it's just, there's a line in A Serious Man with Michael Stuhlbarg, which is, accept the mystery. right? Like at a certain point, you just have to accept the mystery of it, that the world is a strange and terrifying and wonderful place, and these things happen, So that's what drove me there.
As I was watching the episode, it really struck me. You have a lot of faith in the audience because the jumps, the way you integrate soundtrack, the non-linear writing, and I mean, it would have been much easier to do like like a more procedural police thing. You can have the Gothic, American Gothic frame, but it would have been just sort of an easier piece of writing. So I think it's interesting that you trust the audience so much.
Yeah, audiences are very sophisticated, especially now. I mean, my son is 12, and he's absorbed more story in 12 years than I absorbed at 35, 40 years. I mean, it's just the constant from audio to video to, so, people now they're looking at their phones and they're like, oh, he's the murderer, and oh, they're sleeping. People catch up so quickly, and they're so far ahead of you that the worst thing you can do is underappreciate their intelligence. But there are definitely moments where you need to take a leap of faith with a storyteller, but I think they also, if you can do something unexpected or surprise an audience, they put that other device down. You know what I mean? They really engage, and the truthiness of it, right? The true storiness of it allows me to have coincidence, synchronicity, randomness, and so if you really can't predict what happens because sometimes Juno Temple is going to walk out of a diner and a truck is going to hit a car and it's going to slide into her, there's no plot device that builds up to that. It's just something that happens, right? And it puts her and so those moments really, allow me as a storyteller to challenge the audience. And I also think as a fiction writer, the reader does half the work, right? You write the words, they see pictures in their heads, and filmed mediums tend to be more passive. But I think if you can add that ethereal thematic or mystery into it, now the audience is watching and their imagination is engaged, and that's why it's so rewarding to me how many people tell me that they rewatch Fargo, sometimes every year, one season or a few seasons, or it's very rewatchable for people because there's so much in there for them.
Anyone else? Here, hold on for a mic.
Hi, yeah. Forgive me, this question's a bit rambly while I'm trying to figure out how to word it properly. I kind of realize that a lot of creative people sometimes feel like control freaks in a way where they don't want to hand off any of the roles because they feel like they're not going to get their vision across if it's not themselves. I know I struggle with that myself. Anytime I make a short film, I feel like I have to have every role, or else it's not my baby in a way. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like with say the pilot of Legion, which you wrote and directed, that that's your baby and that's your full heart is in it, your full connection with it, is different than something like this episode where you didn't direct it? Is there a loss of connection there for you, or do you think it's...
No, not at all. I mean, in some ways, everything you see on that screen, from the design of the Waffle Hut to what they're wearing, I mean, that's all stuff that I approve going into it. And obviously the episode director has a real voice in it as well. And, the reality is I don't want to do everybody's job, right? My job is hard enough. And so I had a costume designer once come to me and show me some looks, and I said, oh, I like these two. And then he left and realized that I hadn't chosen one. And I said, no, I like these two, and you decide, right? I mean, I think that's, especially in long form storytelling, you burn yourself out if you feel like you need to own every decision. What you need to do is hire well, right? And trust the people who work for you. And then, if you do that, because so much, especially in television, is by numbers, and people feel, like they're just punching a clock. The moment that people wake up artistically and they realize that you want their best work, it's night and day, the relationship. So.
when something as a writer, how much it matters to you that what you write, you chose this episode because it was different from what you wrote and different from what was directed. So how important is for you to keep that freedom for things to happen after you write, for you to make editorial decision, like, let's add the Carter bit.
Right.
How much space do you leave to yourself for that?
Well, I always plan to shoot it the way I wrote it, and if I do, and it works on the day, I tend to leave it alone. But I guess I'm open to it not working, or a better idea to come along. I know there are filmmakers who that have a lot more chaos in their process, and they want to ad lib on the day, and that's not my process at all. I mean, we say the words that are written, and we block these things out, but within that, Jason Schwartzman once asked me when we were working on season 4, he's like, how are you able to be so prolific? And Kyle said, well, he has no creative doubt. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I said, yeah, I don't really. When I have an idea that I like, that's just what we're going to do. But it also allows me to feel very secure creatively. And so when I get on set with the actors and they want to talk things through, or they have ideas, I'm open. I don't feel threatened by other ideas, and I'm perfectly happy in the moment to discover something that I hadn't envisioned before. So there is a process of being open, and it's an act of play, right? At the end of the day, my main job as a showrunner is to create an environment for the artists where we get to play and not worry about time or money or any of it. And so, that's what I try to offer them, is the feeling like they don't need to know how behind we are, or how much this is all costing us, etc. And so within that, the act of play, which is the purest form of imagination, you discover things.
I have one last one, and then we go upstairs. Speaking of creative doubts, you obviously, I think Kyle, which by the way is Noah's wife, and she's right here. But you obviously don't have she's right. I mean, you undertook Fargo and now Alien, which is another not an easy
that opportunity.
Not an easy thing to tackle. What can you tell us about Alien Earth, which is going to be in August? You say it's going to air in August?
Yeah, August 12th it airs. It's big. It's the biggest thing I've ever done. We filmed it in Bangkok over the course of probably a full year, and it's 8 episodes. If I have a skill at reinventing classic movies, for in long form, it's in understanding what the original made me feel and why, and then recreating those feelings by telling you a totally different story. And I wouldn't know how to teach that skill to someone, but I look at what those first 2 Alien movies are, and I think about a lot of things that I then apply to the show, and you might not, in watching it, be able to draw lines between the choices I've made and the movies that I watch, but I can, and they're there. It's by far the most commercial thing I've done, which is not a dirty word. It's just a way of saying I really tried to make something that was accessible to the largest possible audience while still being true to my own artistic instincts. And the other thing that I can't believe I got away with is that I do have, I have made primarily my living on the screen, reinventing existing stories, but I'm praised as an original storyteller, right? That's really humbling, to feel like, yes, it's Fargo, but it's me, right? And yes, it's Alien, but it's me. And I think I don't take that for granted, and it's been a lot of fun. I will say the difference between Calgary, it's 20 below zero, and then you get on a plane and you land in Bangkok and it's 115 degrees out. That was startling.
Any last thought? No, then I want to thank Noah and Bret, and we'll meet you upstairs for
All right. Thank you so much
drink.
for coming, everybody.